All right. Can you all see that? Wonderful. Hello, and thank you for joining us for our March 2024 Lunch and Learn. I am Jenna Klinner, the service coordinator for the WiscWeb team. I'm joined here by Matt Goins, who's also on cam, and several other members of the team, including our developers. Here is our agenda for today. First, we'll kind of start with some quick updates and reminders for all of you. Next, we will provide some deeper insight into our decision to move to the block editor for WordPress. I'll then touch briefly on how this change relates to redesigning your site, which is a question that came up last time. And finally, we'll end with some demos. We'll show a new feature in UW Events that allows you to create and share events based on a category. And we will also talk about Universal Analytics a little bit. The data for Universal Analytics is going away very soon. So we'll kind of just make sure you know how you can download that data if you need it. All right, so we're going to start with these updates and reminders. We have several today. I have a lot of links to share in this section. I have them all grouped together and I'll post them after this slide so that you have them all because I'm going to talk about several pages. First, I'll note that there haven't been any major updates to our roadmap lately, but in case you weren't aware, we do have a roadmap. It's a public roadmap. It's NetID protected just because we divulged some details related to security settings that we don't want to have out in the open. Um, but this is where you can learn about what we're working on, what we're prioritizing, and why. Um, and you can also see what's on the docket in terms of next steps for our team. So just a reminder there, we talked about this before, but wanted to make sure if there's any new folks that you know about that roadmap. The second is another reminder. We've been mentioning this kind of ongoing cookie issues that campus is having in past lunch and learns, but I wanted to touch on it again today because there was a recent tech partner email that talked about it. And so I wanted to make sure that you all knew that that was the same conversation. It's the same cookie thing that we've been talking about. Essentially, that users on campus are seeing a too many cookies error when attempting to access campus sites. Um, if you are unfamiliar, we posted a recap on our website. That'll be part of the links that I share momentarily. A little article on kind of how this impacts you as a WiscWeb user. But I wanted to note a couple things that I don't know if they're being fully understood here. So as a reminder, this is not just a WiscWeb thing. All websites on campus are subject to contribute to this issue. Many site services are impacted by this, not just WiscWeb. There are some things that you can do to help. In WiscWeb, we've already accommodated Google Analytics in a way that helps prevent this issue. So if you have Google Analytics linked within your site, from that perspective, we're already doing some things that can help. But if you're using Google Tag Manager to pull in your Google Analytics account, there are some steps that you can do to help with this where we can't physically do it for you. So that'll be outlined in that doc that I share later, but I just wanted to note that there might be some steps that you can do to try to help with this, to help all of campus with the cookie issues that we're seeing. Um, if you do see the too many cookies error, or you hear someone in your group who comes to you and says that they're experiencing it, please have them clear their all-time browser cache and cookies, completely close down their browser, and then completely restart. We found that that process is the most helpful for fully clearing out those cookies. And you'll just have a much better experience if you follow that step. And then the fourth thing is please don't use Hotjar. We used to be a little bit more timid about how we communicated this in the past, but ultimately the consensus across campus is this is one of the biggest contributors to this issue, unfortunately, and we have no way of accommodating that other than not using it. The company just doesn't allow you to change the root level domain for that, and all we can do is avoid using it to try to make the general experience better for everyone on campus. Okay, back to reminders. A third reminder, please, please, please do not use WiscWeb for sensitive restricted data. We're primarily seeing this happen through Gravity Forms, where folks are using Gravity Forms to prompt for content that is considered sensitive or restricted. This content gets saved on the back end of the site, and our service is not secured for this level of data. So if you're not sure if the data that you're prompting for is considered sensitive or restricted, please reach out and we can put you in touch with the appropriate data steward based on the type of data. I will include a link to the data stewards in that group of links that I'm going to add here soon, but just noting that. Our fourth reminder is that we're shifting our focus to the block editor theme. You're going to hear us talking about it. We had a poll at the start of this session to kind of gauge familiarity with drag and drop type editors. You're going to hear us refer to this as both the block editor, maybe Gutenberg. This is WordPress's new editor. We're starting to build in it. And I'll be going into detail a little bit more later in this presentation, but generally it's important for you to know that a large portion of our time and effort will be spent on working in this block editor, also known as the Gutenberg theme. This means that time for development on the current UW theme will be more limited, and you may see us closing some of the feature requests that are out there that have had little engagement in the last 6 months. This is so that we can focus our attention and efforts on a new theme and one that meets broad needs for campus. Next, a little update for those of you interested in participating in the direction of the block editor. And the theme and where that goes, I would highly encourage you to join the WordPress users community of practice group in Teams. Within that group, we've added a sub-channel dedicated to block editor / Gutenberg conversations. This is where we'll share updates and gather insight from the general audience, general WordPress community, um, in terms of maybe like feedback and things like that as we continue building. Info on joining can be found in our website, and we'll also have that in the links that I'll post momentarily here. And finally, the last update for you, we have overhauled our customizations webpage to provide a little bit more information on what can and cannot be customized within the WiscWeb service and why. We've also included alternatives to customization within that documentation, just so you know that there are ways that you can kind of bring your brand or flair to the site that don't require a paid customization. I'd like to give a shout out to Ketter Joyner of the web platforms and services team. She is the one who helped us revise this page. She did a lot of the graphics. She did a lot of the research. So just props for her. I will show that one. Just have to move some things on my screen here, if it allows me to. There we go. Hopefully you can still see this. Here is our new customizing your site page, including these lovely new graphics by Ketter. Kind of shows you what you can and cannot do here with these little icons. And then I'm just going to scroll down and show also, here was the alternative section where if you're just wondering how you can include your brand without a customization, there's some options here. So I will also drop those links now into the chat in that big grouping. See if I can make this a little bit more user-friendly for you by bolding the titles. 1 second. Going to be a lot of links, but it covers everything that we talked about. And there we go. Hopefully that came through. I'm just catching up on the chat here too. It looks like, oh, thank you to Beth regarding the sensitive restricted data note. It looks like you can also reach out to Dapper, DAPIR, if you're not familiar. if you have questions about sensitive restricted data. So thank you for sharing that. All right. And of course, I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second while I can get my window back. Okay. I think that wraps up the updates and reminders here. But if you have any questions, please go ahead and throw them in the chat. Now I just wanted to talk a little bit about the block editor in Gutenberg just a little bit more. We talked about it, we introed it at the last session for you. We are spending a little bit more time building out the new version of the UW theme that utilizes blocks. It has a very drag and drop approach. I wanted to make sure that you had some background on why we've made this decision. Over the past few years, we've done a good amount of research on what our users and the larger campus community are looking for in terms of the UW theme and the WiscWeb service. We've been compiling that data, and we are seeing some clear themes, which is great. Two WiscWeb focused user research opportunities are listed on the slide here. These captured some of the most prevalent themes that we're seeing. First was that mural activity that we did in the Lunch and Learn last year in July. In that activity, we asked what you think WiscWeb should be used for, who the target audience is, and what we should focus on for the next fiscal year. There were two themes that we saw in this activity. Generally, users wanted new design and feature enhancements. And we also heard that you would like more best practice guidance. So those are two things that we're thinking about. Second was our 2023 user feedback survey. From that survey, we saw themes around wanting templates, additional layout options, and drag and drop capabilities. And then more generally, through efforts like our feature request board, our larger campus website use survey, um, and just general support requests, we've seen themes around things like wanting more flexibility and control, uh, maybe like more robust image display options, and additional design options. So these themes are areas where the block editor for WordPress can improve the experience for our users, which is a big reason why we're spending so much time on discovery and development in this new version of the theme. You may be wondering, why is this such a big project? And I can give you a little insight into that. There's several reasons. First, while the block editor has been out for several years, it's still evolving. Each update that WordPress makes has changes and new features. So it hasn't kind of gotten to a point yet that um, it has been like stagnant in any way. It's still very much evolving. That means we're learning about new features with every one of those releases, and it also mean that things could change periodically that would require reworking of the code. The block editor is very different from what we refer to as the classic editor, which is what we have now in the UW theme. There's a reason why we haven't moved yet and why so many others still haven't. And it's because it's really a big change. It requires a lot of discovery and testing to fully understand the options and then choose the ones that will suit our university best. Like the current theme, this is a collaboration between WiscWeb and University Marketing. Both of our teams have very full plates, so we're doing our best to keep this project moving forward while also balancing other things that we're working on. We're also a bit new to the multi-team collab at this scale, so we're learning as we go, like what works best. But ultimately, it's been a great experience so far. We're just taking things slow to make sure that we're doing it right. Um, we want to make sure that you feel heard along the way too. Uh, So we're taking time to find avenues for feedback and provide updates on status. We've been thoroughly assessing like that historical feedback that I talked about in the last slide and gathering insights from folks as we go. We've also talked to other universities about their experience. Um, in this particular vein, if you have requests, expectations, or ideas for how you can be included in the discussion, please post in the chat. We're happy to hear from you. We want to know what makes the most sense for all of you, and we'll try to keep that in mind as we continue. But a good reminder is that we do have that awesome team space now in the WordPress users community practice that you can join. And then finally, we are 100% aware that this will be a big shift for folks. So we're continuously looking at ways that we can make this migration as simple as possible for you. So that's a big piece of what we're looking at right now. This means we're exploring migration tooling, considering training that might be needed, thinking about instructional documentation as we go, etc. So I will pause there. I saw that there's maybe some talk in the chat. Let's see.
No, it was just me.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. If you have any questions about any of those, please feel free to post. Did you mention a timeline? I did not. We're going to touch on this a little bit in the next slide, but generally there's no strong timeline. I think we're still very much in the discovery portion of this. We're digging into like what is possible. There's a lot of areas where we have to make a choice in the direction that we want to go. So we're still very much researching the options and deciding. Will the classic editor still be an option moving forward? So my guess is that for a period of time, the classic editor would still be available, but that eventually we would need to get folks off. And that's simply just because we don't have the capacity to do long-term support of both themes. As you know, we take on maintenance, support, we do like knowledge-based documentation, things like that for everything that you can do in WiscWeb. And so doing that for both would be very challenging for us. We will be doing it for a period of time. We'll definitely try to give folks a good amount of time for the transition, likely multi-year, but at some point, yes, the classic editor would likely be going away. Um, is this something that we will get to choose? I think, Rich, let me know if I'm looking into this question in a way that doesn't fit with what you were asking. But I think maybe what Rich is asking there is like, do we get to choose whether we use the classic editor or the block editor? Sounds like I already answered it. I mean, essentially, eventually we'll want to get everyone over to this block editor approach. It really is the new phase of WordPress. So at a certain point, we don't know if the classic editor will continue to be supported. But also, yeah, we will need to just consider the long-term support for WiscWeb. Any other questions? All right. Well, please feel free to keep posting in the chat, but I will move on to the next slide. All right. A question that was posed in the last Lunch and Learn was regarding redesigning a site with the block editor coming. So the question was kind of like, should I redesign now or should I wait until this new theme is available? And this is a really tricky question to answer. We attempted to provide some guidance here, but please note that the answer is very nuanced and it really depends on a number of factors. Essentially, this will be a multi-year project for us. No one is going to be asked to move right when the is available. So you'll have some time to work through the migration. The new theme might not even be available for another year plus. So it could be multiple years before you need to move. We're just trying to queue up information and let you know that it's coming. Um, Here are some cases where we think you should keep to your current plan or schedule for redesign and not delay. First, if you are migrating your site from a child theme to the standard UW theme, this would actually be very beneficial to complete before moving to the block editor theme. It will ultimately make your transition easier, so as we won't be accommodating customizations in the new theme. and some things might not translate well. The good news is that the block editor will offer more variation than the current UW theme. So some customizations may not be needed, but our team will not be prioritizing work to migrate existing customizations one to one, the same way we will be focusing on what exists in the standard theme, if that makes sense. So we're trying to find one-to-one migration paths as much as we can for the standard UW theme, but it would be impossible for us to find ways of translating every single customization everyone could possibly have, if that makes sense. Um, so if you're already thinking about moving from from a child theme site to a standard theme, this is a great time to do that. Two, if you're redesigning to clean up existing content and remove unnecessary pages, that is definitely worthwhile right now. It's a good time to get that work done. This will ultimately make your transition to the block editor easier just by cleaning up all that content. So all this to say, more generally, better content is always good. Um, this new theme coming shouldn't get in the way of you cleaning up your sites, removing unnecessary content, restructuring pages, etc. If you're really unsure on how to proceed, please consider attending office hours to meet with a staff member. We'd be happy to hear more about your unique cases and offer guidance based on what we know now. I think some of these are just going to have to be one-off conversations, really depending on what you were looking to do. Let's see here. We'd also like to note here that this extra emphasis we're putting into the new theme means that development of the existing theme will be slowed. It's something I talked about in the previous slide. Ideally, we will be mostly focusing on only bug fixes so that the majority of our time can be spent on building new features in the new theme. So I'm just revisiting the chat here. There's a question. You might have already answered this. I came in late from another meeting, but will current feedback be considered for the Gutenberg update, or should I hold off on UW theme requests? So I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I would say if there's a request that you have that you think you'll need moving forward, regardless of the theme, that's still worthwhile to put in the feature request board. If you're not sure, go ahead and put it in there. If it's something that's very specific to existing technology that might not be the case in the future, maybe you hold off. I would say maybe err on the side of throwing it in there, and we can kind of let you know if it's something that we can or cannot focus on, if that's helpful. We also have a question, is UMark pursuing getting more with study to use sites to use UW theme? Yes. Generally, we've already seen this. There's been a lot of documentation more recently to kind of point folks both to the UW theme and the WiscWeb service. I think like brand.wisc.edu does this. I think there's been emails kind of about that. I don't think there's anyone being forced though, if that helps. I think it's like it's great from a number of perspectives. It's nice to use the standard UW theme because it's campus branded. It's also tested for accessibility. It's also maintained. So I think there's certain benefits of it, but I don't think it will be policed, if that makes sense. Let me know if there's any follow-ups on that. Um, and then let's see. Will you be able to do page customizations using HTML within the block editor? So this is a great question. Um, I would say expect a similar experience to what you have now. I think we don't exactly know what that future holds, but generally, we do limit how much can be customized for a number of reasons. Accessibility is one of those big reasons. Branding is one of those big reasons. Um, so I would guess that in this future state, you might have more flexibility and control in terms of like the elements that you have available to you, but you wouldn't necessarily get to within WiscWeb, that is, be able to fully edit all of the code on your site. Let's see.
I'm gonna yes and that
Yeah.
because um so tweaking fonts, that gets away from the brand. That's part of what Jenna just said. We don't really want people doing that because we want it's the theme, it's the campus branded theme. We want to make sure that people are using the campus branded stuff as part of the theme. Um, Creating tables is an interesting question because tables are they create accessibility concerns. And so I understand the desire to build them, but there's a lot to make sure that they are accessible. And one of the things that we really do strive to do is to make the theme as accessible as possible. And hand coding tables um, plays into plays into that a little bit. So I guess I would always take a look at maybe WP data tables as a way to create some of those simple basic scratch tables if it was static information that you were going to go in and edit after the fact. But I guess I'd be curious to see what types of tables people are looking at. The other yes and I was going to do is as someone who supports all of these sites, hearing someone is going to go in and customize their HTML and potentially not be the one responsible for that HTML in 6 months, a year, or whatever, and then I have to go in and clean up HTML because somebody else takes over the site who has zero clue about how to use HTML. That is a big reason why we push back on people wanting to do more of their own coding and customizations and things like that is because when you're done coding it, I have to support it. And I don't always know the type of code that you use or that what your intention was. So it makes it difficult for me to not just go in and say, I'm getting rid of it and recreating the page at all. So all that work that you do may go away because I won't have the ability to support it. And the people who inherit your sites won't have the ability to use it or update it. So that's kind of a big reason why we really do pull back a lot of things is it has to be something that is sustainable and supportable. And a lot of things people want to do are neither. So, I mean, that's kind of a hardline way of saying it, but it is the reality of our service and the massive amounts of sites that we have to support.
Yeah, it looks like there was some great notation just on tables, kind of in terms of maybe accessibility. Imagine someone reading a table out loud to you, almost always that will be kind of incomprehensible. Better to reformat as lists with headers when possible, which is great advice. We also have a question, great question here. Will our sites convert from the classic block in an automated way? We're doing a lot of discovery to try to understand what might be possible in terms of like a one-to-one automated migration. We can't promise anything right now, but I think our goal at all times is to try to make this process as easy as possible. We are fully aware that people need an easy way to transition. So we're spending a lot of time understanding what are the possible migration paths. What have other universities been doing? So we've been chatting with other groups. Um, how could we translate content that's in the current theme into this new theme so that you have like a starting point? That said, there will likely be things that just can't translate. I don't have a good example of those. I think like particularly maybe like customized stuff, but generally like as much as possible, we will do our best to try to find a way that you can very easily, or as easily as possible, migrate content. Because we don't know exactly what that looks like, I'm just really hesitant to say like, yes, everything will be perfectly automated. That's obviously our goal, but just not knowing exactly what that will look like, I feel more confident saying we are going to do our best to try to accommodate it as much as possible to make this as easy as possible for you. Will we be able to do page customizations? Oh, that was an old question. Sorry. That's a mini bar. WordPress admin training on LinkedIn Learning teaches the Gutenberg interface. It's pretty intuitive. That's just a nice little tip if you're interested in seeing the back end of the block editor or Gutenberg. There are resources out there. We kind of touched on this at the beginning of the session, but some folks might not have been in the meeting yet. We're hesitant to kind of show that back end now because we think that that could change a little bit. We don't want to cause more confusion. But if you're just kind of interested in what it looks like, there's a number of resources out there that you can kind of take a look at. Other questions? Did I miss any? Awesome. Thank you for these questions. This really helps us understand kind of where you're feeling like you need more info. So thank you for everyone posting your lovely questions in the chat. I will move on, but feel free to keep posting. Um, so we kind of did this question here. Next up is demos. So I'm going to show you a new feature that we have um, that is kind of an add-on to an existing feature, so to speak. I'm going to move this here. Okay. We already looked at this customization page, so I'm going to X out of that. So our new feature that we have is an add-on to an existing feature. A couple months ago, we added an ability to share an event on another site based on like the URL link for the other site, I guess, the external site. And now, based on some user feedback, we've added the capability to customize that further and share an events list on another site based on category or group of categories. So I'm going to show you that here. I have a sandbox site here that just has, like a page title and a text block, and I'm going to kind of walk through how you might add this new feature. So I'm going to add a page element here, and I'm going to choose events list. For this, you're adding an external event here, so I'm going to toggle that option, and I'm going to enter the URL for the site that I want to pull in the list for. So it's likely going to be something slash events. And then this new feature is this category slug here. So I'll show where you can find a slug, but first I'll just kind of enter so you can see. I have an existing slug on that site for the term neat. And you can also add multiple here as it is described in this description field by just entering like a comma space, and I could do something like that. So these are two slugs that exist on the Genetest site for my events. For my title, I'll give this a more specific title just so that users know that this is about the events coming from another site. And then I'm not going to augment anything else right away. Update the page. Preview the page changes in a new tab. And then you can see here that I now have a generated list of events from my Genetest site that are just the ones coming from those categories here. And if I were to remove one of the categories and republish, you can see that list changes. In order to pull in events based on category, we are using something called the slug. The slug is auto-generated in most cases based on the category, but I'm just going to show you by going to UW Events event categories here in a new tab. So when you're creating an event on another site, I can title an event called fun. If I create this here, you can see that there is a slug field under this column that is auto-generated. It's based on the name. If you have multi-word categories, it typically adds like a hyphen between. So if you said something like my uh, neat events, if I add that category, you can see it's hyphenated here. You will need to add the category slug exactly how it's entered. So that's something to double check when you go to your site that you're pulling the events from. Make sure you have the exact slug when you're entering it into the field. Something else I want to just note too is that these events here are coming in from the Genetest site. if I were to add or remove an event from my events list on that site, so it's sort of the site that the content is coming from, you might not see that change right away on this site, which is the sandbox site. Um, the reason for that is caching. So if you do remove or add an event from your source site, the best way to ensure that that change shows up on the site that you're on is to just republish that page that has the events list. So if I just press update here, then refresh the page, those events would come through. So just noting that as a kind of piece related. And I'm going to check the chat here. Looks like there's a question. Will this leave out duplicate events if they are listed in two categories? And the answer is it shouldn't show duplicates. This will get a list of all events that have one of the provided categories. That's a good question.
Also worth pointing that out as well. This isn't like an and functionality. So if you provide two
Yes,
categories, it'll get all events that have one of those categories. So it's not saying get events that have both these categories. It's get all of the events that have any of these categories.
correct. Yes. Any other questions?
Just so I can clarify it, and if other people have this question, this is also only pulling in this events list will only be used for the category value. It wouldn't be also consuming events that you've created within your site. You'd need a different list for.
Correct. Right. Yeah, good point. So
Yeah.
this particular list that I just created is only pulling in external events from the Genetest site that have the slug neat. Um, if I wanted to have another list that had everything, I would have to create an entirely new list and they would be separate. They wouldn't be able to this is already available. Sorry. Yes, I should have mentioned that. This is out there. You can start using this now. You should see this option if you toggle to external events on an events list.
So also, can you go to your testing page, the actual published page, the far right?
Yep.
Yep. Go ahead and click on a cool event. Um, so if you'll notice, for those of you who, and this is another thing that I just thought of, those of you who are going to try to pull in events from other sites that are not your own, Jenna's showing this from a standpoint of we control these events. One way that you can get those slugs is down at the bottom of that event, you'll see posted in fun, comma, neat. So if you click on fun or neat, whichever one, doesn't really matter to me, there's the slug right there. And so what you would need is if you were going to pull from, if you, let's say Linda, if you wanted to pull from genatest.wiscweb.wis.edu/events/whatever, you would need that URL, genatest.wiscweb.wis.edu/events, as the URL of the site you're pulling it from. And then the slug would be whatever is after the category value. That's the slug that you would need there as well. I know
I'm gonna
I've had this
caution this.
conversation. Yes.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with people who are like, oh, we really like the events that this group creates and we want to pull them in and things like that. You can do it. You absolutely can. But, and I will yield to Jenna because she probably has a more formulated thought than I do.
Oh, now I'm yield. Okay.
Yes, I
I
you
thought you were
go.
going to say something else. All right.
No,
So
you go.
my take on this is it's really intended for groups that might have multiple sites within the same
Domain.
organization. I
Yeah.
think like I'm going to use Weissman as an example, if that's okay. The Weissman Center has their main site in WiscWeb. They also have a number of subsites. And so this would allow you to create events in one place, categorize them on the main site, and then pull them into the subsite based on categories so that you don't have to duplicate in multiple places. This is not necessarily meant for situations where you are you are like, oh, I like their events. I'm going to pull them in. And here's why. A number of events on campus are intended for a particular targeted audience. So I would caution you if you are considering bringing in someone else's events, please talk to them first.
Yeah.
Um, It's just a kindness to just ensure that they're comfortable with it and they understand that you're going to be doing it and that your audience may be seeing this content now. I would say that's true for anything though. Today.Whisk, you could technically pull in events from someone
Mhm.
else's like hub in Today.Whisk, but like the reason why this can be problematic, maybe there's a specific number of seats available. And they really want their staff to have, or their students or their audience to have priority. Maybe maybe it's really just intended for students and they don't want those events advertised for staff or the general public. Um, Things like that. There's reasons why you wouldn't want to do this. So I would say if you are considering it, please really consider being kind to other groups on campus and ask first. But obviously, if you own the main site and you own the subsites, that's sort of a different situation.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just gonna. So I answered Sarah's question. You gave the caveat of that. I'll also say that if you're pulling in content, this is also true for today.wis.edu events. If you're just pulling in content that somebody else owns and is responsible for, you have no control over what that content is. So whatever goes into that event or that post, you're kind of accepting that it's something that you would be okay with your audience seeing as well. Now, obviously, we are all hopefully adults and it's all good, proper content, but you never know how somebody's going to react to the content that you're sharing. So also take that as a caution as well.
Yeah. And I would remind, I did mention this, but if you delete or add a new event to the source site, you will need to refresh that page in order for that to show up, uh, unless you wait a certain amount of time for the cache to clear. But I know I anticipate this question, like added these events and they're not showing up. You will need to refresh the page or just wait for that cache to clear. So if you make a quick change, it might not show in this new events list. Question, will events pulled in from elsewhere auto update if the event is rescheduled or other changes are made? Um, that's definitely related to the cache. So it could be, Scott, can you remind me how long it takes for the cache to clear?
Yeah, Andy just posted in chat as well.
Oh,
It
perfect.
it
Thank you.
saves the data for 15 minutes before it'll
Yeah.
refresh it.
So it's not like you have to wait a ton of time, but I think if you're really concerned about that showing the most recent data right away, it's best to refresh it. And that's another reason why it's best to just do this if you own both of the sites, because you have access to both spaces. Um, that puts pressure on the other group to have to, you know, keep you informed when they make changes and stuff. And that's not really like realistic in the long run. Other questions? All right, I am going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to hand it over to Matt for some Google Analytics talk.
I'm in, coach. Okay. So I've had this conversation a few times over the past few weeks, and I thought this would be something good to just retouch on for the lunch and learn, just to reiterate and remind some of you, because for those of you who remember, over the past couple of years, Google Analytics has transitioned from its old Universal Analytics way of collecting data, UA, to now the fun and very different Google Analytics 4 way of doing this. A number of groups still haven't transitioned off of the UA code in their customizer area. So please make sure you go and take a look at whether or not you're using analytics, whether or not it's been updated, and honestly, whether or not you, as person who now is controlling this stuff, has access to the analytics account. We can't help you get access to the analytics account if somebody else set it up, but you could also always set up a new one as well. More than happy to meet with people to chat about that. It's a pretty quick process. Um, to do it, learning analytics, much longer process. Regardless, so one of the things that people have been reaching out to me about is when you log into your Google Analytics, you're getting this very ominous countdown thing here that's telling you about the property no longer processing new data, etc. This is what you're seeing for the Universal Analytics, the old Google Analytics account, the old Google Analytics tracking code, I should say. And so basically what it's saying is you haven't yet moved away from UA, even though you may have set up Google Analytics 4 and you are still collecting data via Google Analytics 4. I know this because WiscWeb, we did this almost right away when I started telling people about this. So one of the things Google wants you to do is they want you to go through this process of the setup assistant and basically trying to get you to do some things that will um, uh, collect data for Google, essentially. Um, but basically, there's this whole setup process. Um, it is connected. Am I in it now? Yes. Maybe I did all this now and I don't have to worry about it. Oh, yeah, here it is. So when you get to this point, there are a number of these options. Again, it's all of this stuff that Google's trying to get you to set up as part of your transition to Google Analytics 4. But you'll notice that, data is flowing. I'm collecting the data. I've turned a number of these off. Obviously, there's one that I haven't done yet. So I'm not doing Google Ads. We don't do any of the Google Ads stuff. So I have all of that stuff turned off. But obviously, there's one that was still lingering. So I will mark that as complete because I'm not doing any consent settings. But basically, what I went through is I just went in and the ones that I needed to address, I addressed, obviously, like conversions and audiences, conversions, it's what you're tracking type things. But then if I don't need it, I'm marking it as complete. And that's that. And so I will now dismiss this. So that's one is you're going to get this ominous timer thing that's telling you you need to finish up the property setup for GA4. It's basically you just need to go in and finish up this last little bit of Google setup type stuff. So just make sure you do that. Again, don't be over worried about it. If you need to chat with me about it, feel free to reach out. The other aspect of this is as part of that ominous countdown thing is telling you, see, I've done it. It's still telling me that I need to do it. It's also telling you that July 1st, 2024 is when you want to have this done because it's telling you to maintain access to data from this property, you should download your data now. This is something that I talked about when we were initially going through this process of moving to Google Analytics 4 is Google wasn't going to keep all of your old Universal Analytics data for infinity. It was going to go away eventually. So for those of you who need to have that archived data, you're going to need to go into your old Universal Analytics account and somehow export that data. There are several options to do this. The one that I have walked people through is I've gone to the overview, so behavior overview, and then I'll change the date range. So let's say you don't remember when transitioned off, but let's say we went 2017 to January 1, 2024. So if I hit apply, give it a second. So obviously you can see the cutoff date of when Universal Analytics stopped collecting data. And this has more to do with me taking it out of Tag Manager than me moving over GA4 information. But anyways, here is 7 years worth of data right here. So now what I can do is I can export that value. And I can export it to Sheets, Excel, CSV. I would recommend Sheets or Excel because that way you can get your columns, you can manipulate the data, sort, filter, etc. As necessary. But yeah, so just export it. Lots of things beeping at me, sorry. Import the data. Get that information in there. Okay, so let me pop over. So that's it. Export the data so that you don't lose any of that information. Because I know for some of you, you do use it in some of your reporting features, and I don't want that to be an issue for you when you get to like July 1 and you're trying to look back and you move to GA4 in like January. Um, and you still have 6 months of UA data that you want to report on. So, explored options for analytics that isn't using Google. Yeah, I guess we never did because we integrated it right away. One of the issues, obviously, would be anything that you want to use, you'd have to work with us on to see if it's something that we can add um, to the features themselves.
I can touch on that next one, Matt.
Okay. You want to?
Um,
Yeah.
Someone said I had heard whispers from my IT team about the UW potentially moving away from Google Analytics. Was there any truth to that? So we've heard whisperings as well. I think generally it was related to how Google deals with data. So we have not heard an update on that. I would say for now, sit tight. We'll definitely let you know if there's any changes in WiscWeb. But if campus did make a decision, it would impact WiscWeb. So I would say in that case, we would definitely be notifying folks. But since there's not a firm decision on anything yet, we haven't heard on that. I would say for now, just sit tight and we'll let you know as soon as we hear from
Yeah,
someone on that.
the current state is, for a time we being the collective we were thinking about moving away from Google Analytics because, like Jenna said, there was some concern about what Google was doing with our data, and again, the sensitive or restricted information that could potentially be involved with some of our groups that have like PHI data and things like that, and what did the analytics data show for groups that needed to have more sensitivity to what they were collecting. So it would have affected WiscWeb a bit there. Right now, there is no specific. There, we're just continuing on. There was a talk about potential alternatives. We really didn't go anywhere with that either. So analytics is what we're using moving forward. I shouldn't say what we're using. Analytics is what we have available to us moving forward. If there are other options that we need to discover or to research, we will, but it wouldn't be something that we would just do in like a quick quick decision. It would have to be something that would be talked about over time. If we don't care about historical data and we're getting reporting in GA4, we should be good. Yes. If your data is collecting, and again, for those of you who are making that move over to GA4, one of the first things that I have you do when I work with you is I have you go into your GA4 account, and then I have you go to reports, and I have you go to real time. And then when I'm working with you, what I'll do is I will have my phone as well as a private browser window or an incognito window. I will have your site up in both of those so that you can see that data is actually coming in. So this is the easiest and quickest way to see whether or not you're collecting data is just by going to your real-time view in GA. So, dun, 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 dun. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Think that's it. I also wanted to touch on, and I was going to send an email out about this next week, having to do with like the whole page redesign conversation and learning a little bit more. I am going to be doing a few sessions on redesigning slash moving a site into WiscWeb from, I think it's hosted in Wix right now. It's a lab site, and it's pretty straightforward. So I'm gonna do a session next Tuesday at noon is when I was going to do it. I'll send out information and I'll do it through Zoom. It's not really going to be a help session, more as just I'm going to work on it. I'll record it. If people want to ask me questions while I'm working on it, you'll kind of see what my process is like for building a site out and the things that I think about as I'm building pages and home pages and things like that. So I'll send an email out about that on Monday with the Zoom link for it.
Real quick before we cap here, there was a note, so sort of related to that general conversation about um, alternatives to Google Analytics. It looks like Hotjar was listed, but as we mentioned, we don't recommend Hotjar because of the cookie issue. But a general note about that, if you are exploring new tooling, either for analytics tracking or something else on your site, please make sure to check the documentation to ensure that you can set the cookies at the correct domain. That'll just make sure that we can kind of help the situation on campus with the cookie issues, but also saves you some time and effort because you might not, you might find that it causes problems in the future and then have to get rid of it, which would be not so fun. Awesome. And yes, Matt will be recording his session on the creating a site. So that will be shared. We're almost at time, so I think we can cap it there.